You know that moment when you look at your bank account at the end of the month and you think, wait, where did it all go? Like you swear you didn't do anything crazy. Maybe a couple of coffees here, a dinner out there, a few online orders that you barely even remember placing. Nothing dramatic. Nothing life-changing, yet somehow the money just disappears. It evaporates like water on hot pavement, and then you try to do the responsible thing. You tell yourself, okay, this month I'm going to save. You make a little mental promise, maybe even write it down. And for like 3 days, you're doing fine. You feel proud. You feel in control. And then slowly, almost invisibly, it starts slipping again. A small purchase here. A treat-yourself moment there. A stressful day that somehow ends with you buying something you didn't even know you needed an hour earlier. And suddenly saving money doesn't just feel hard. It feels almost impossible. And honestly, that feeling, it's way more common than people admit. My name is Tim, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth, while others feel like they're running on a treadmill that never stops speeding up. And I don't say that from a place of superiority or anything like that, if anything. I've been on both sides of that financial chaos more times than I'd like to admit. And here's the weird thing I've noticed after years of digging into this stuff. Saving money doesn't fail because people are lazy. It doesn't fail because they don't care. It fails because, at the beginning, your brain is literally not wired to make it. It's easy, yeah. That part surprises people because we usually think money problems are math problems. But they're not. They're behavior problems, emotional problems, habit problems. And once you see that clearly, something kind of shifts. So in this video, I want to walk you through why saving money feels almost impossible at first, and more importantly, what actually changes when it finally starts working. And I'm not talking about vague advice like just stop spending or make a budget and stick to it. Already know that doesn't work. Long term, I'm talking about the deeper mechanics underneath it all. The invisible forces, the mental friction, the habits you don't even realize you've built. Because once you understand those, saving money stops feeling like a constant uphill battle and starts feeling weirdly natural. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so here's something a bit uncomfortable to admit. Your brain is not designed to care. It's about your future self as much as you think it should, right now. If I offer you two options, let's say $50 today or $60 next month, your brain is going to lean heavily toward the $50 today, even though logically waiting would be better. Even though you know patience pays off, but your brain doesn't operate on logic first. It operates on reward signals, immediate feedback, instant gratification, and saving money. Saving money is the opposite of that. You don't feel rich when you save. You don't get a dopamine hit. There's no emotional payoff in the moment. In fact, it often feels like loss, like you're denying yourself something. So imagine this. You try to save $200 this month. What does your brain experience? It doesn't feel like I just built my future wealth. It feels like I just gave up dinners out, convenience, maybe a bit of comfort, and now my life is slightly less enjoyable. That's a terrible motivational system. I remember going through this phase myself where I'd try to save aggressively, and I'd last maybe a week before I'd start rationalizing small expenses. And the funny thing is, I wasn't even buying big things. It was always small stuff. A coffee, a snack, a delivery order. But those small decisions weren't about the money. They were about emotional relief. A tiny reward to balance out the feeling of restriction. And that's the key thing most people miss. Saving feels like restriction at first, not progress. So what do you do with that? Well, you don't fight your brain head-on. That never works long-term. Instead, you reframe the reward, because the goal isn't to make saving feel like sacrifice forever. The goal is to slowly attach emotional meaning to it. For example, instead of thinking I'm losing $100 by saving this, you start reframing it as I'm buying myself options in the future. It's options to leave a job you hate. Options to handle emergencies without panic. Options to say yes or no based on what you want, not what your bank balance forces you into. That shift doesn't hit immediately. But over time, it starts to rewire how you interpret saving. And honestly, that's where everything starts changing. Let's talk about budgeting for a second. Budgeting is one of those things that sounds incredibly responsible in theory. You sit down, you plan everything out, you assign every dollar a purpose. Rent here, groceries there, savings over there, and for a brief moment, it feels like you've got your life together. But then reality shows up, because budgeting assumes something kind of unrealistic, that you will behave exactly the way you planned weeks ago, in every emotional state you'll experience later, and that's just not how humans work. You don't spend money the same way on a calm Sunday morning as you do after a stressful day at work when you're tired, hungry, and slightly annoyed at everything. Those are two completely different versions of you. I've seen this pattern so many times. Someone builds a perfect budget, and then one unexpected emotional week basically breaks the whole system. Not because they're irresponsible, but because life is unpredictable. And here's the part that really matters. Most budgets fail not because they're wrong, but because they're rigid. They don't leave room for emotional spending. They don't leave room for bad days. They don't leave room for being human. So what happens? You break the budget once, then you feel like you failed. And once that label kicks in, it becomes easier to just abandon it entirely. It's like, well, I already messed up. Might as well reset next month. That mindset alone destroys more financial progress than people realize. So, instead of thinking of budgeting as a strict rulebook, think of it more like a flexible container, something that bends without breaking. A better approach is what I like to think of as friction-based budgeting, instead of trying to control every dollar perfectly. You design your money in a way that naturally reduces bad decisions. For example, automate savings, so you never choose to save it. It just happens to keep spending money slightly inconvenient to access. Allow a guilt-free spending category so you don't feel deprived, because the truth is, you don't need perfect discipline. You need fewer opportunities to rely on discipline in the first place, and that's a much more realistic way to build something sustainable. Here's something kind of funny about money. Most people don't lose it in big dramatic moments. They lose it in tiny, almost invisible leaks. It's like a slow drip in a pipe behind a wall. You don't notice it day to day, but over time, it adds up to something serious. Subscriptions you forgot about. Small delivery fees. Impulse buys that feel insignificant in the moment. Convenient spending that feels harmless because it's only a few dollars at a time. But zoom out over a month, and suddenly it's not small anymore. I once tracked every single expense for a month just to see what would happen. And I remember thinking I was pretty careful with money. I wasn't living extravagantly. I wasn't making wild purchases. But when I looked at the breakdown, I was honestly kind of shocked. It wasn't the big expenses hurting me. It was the accumulation of tiny decisions that never felt important, enough to think twice about. And that's the trap. Because your brain categorizes small expenses as irrelevant. It doesn't flag them as real decisions. It treats them like background noise. But financially, they're anything but noise. So what's the fix? Not extreme restriction? That usually backfires. Instead, awareness, just noticing patterns, changes behavior more than most people expect. When you actually see the leaks, they become harder to ignore. And once you see them, you can start asking better questions. Do I actually use this subscription? Is this convenience worth the long-term cost? Am I spending because I want it, or because it's just easy? You don't have to become obsessive. You just have to become aware. Because awareness alone starts closing the leaks. If saving money depended on willpower, almost nobody would succeed long-term because willpower is inconsistent. It fluctuates. It gets weaker when you're stressed, tired, emotional, or distracted, which honestly is most of the time for most people. So relying on willpower to build savings is like trying to hold water in your hands. Eventually it slips. Systems, though. Systems don't get tired. For example, automatically transferring money to savings right after payday, using separate accounts for spending and saving. Setting up barriers between you and impulsive spending. These things don't require motivation. They just happen. And I think this is where a lot of people finally start seeing progress, not when they become more disciplined, but when they reduce the number of decisions they have to make, because every financial decision you remove is one less chance to mess things up. There was a point where I realized something kind of obvious but powerful. Successful savers aren't constantly resisting temptation, they've just built a life where temptation is harder to act on. That's it. And once you see that, the whole game changes. This one is subtle, but it matters a lot. Your environment is constantly nudging your behavior in ways you don't fully notice. If your phone is full of shopping apps, you'll spend more. If your friends regularly go out and spend, you'll adapt to that normal. If every stressful moment is followed by a quick treat habit, your brain learns that pattern. It's not about blame. It's just conditioning. You're basically a product of repeated cues. I remember noticing this in myself when I was surrounded by certain spending habits. It didn't feel like pressure. It just felt normal. Like this is what people do. And that's the dangerous part. Normal feels invisible. So if you want to change your saving behavior, you can't just change your intention. You also have to change what surrounds you. Unfollow accounts that trigger unnecessary spending urges. Reduce exposure to constant consumer messaging. Even small changes like that can reduce impulse decisions more than you'd expect. Because when the environment changes, behavior follows. 6. How saving finally starts feeling natural. So after all of this, what actually makes saving money click? It's not one big breakthrough moment. It's more like a slow shift. You stop seeing saving as deprivation and start seeing it as control. You stop relying on motivation and start relying on systems. You stop reacting emotionally to every financial decision and start creating distance between impulse and action, and slowly, saving stops feeling like something you have to force. It becomes something that just happens in the background of your life, not perfectly, not magically, but steadily. And honestly, that's the real goal. Not perfection, not extreme discipline, just consistency that doesn't destroy your mental energy. Because the moment saving stops feeling like a fight, that's when it finally starts working. Asterisk, there's actually this phase in saving money that almost nobody warns you about. It's not the beginning, when everything feels exciting and new and you're full of motivation, and it's not the end, where things feel stable and automatic. It's this weird middle stretch where you're trying, but nothing feels particularly rewarding yet. You're saving a little bit of money, but not enough that it feels life-changing. You're cutting back on spending, but not enough that life suddenly feels simpler or freer. You're kind of stuck between the old version of you and the new version you're trying to become. And honestly, this is where most people quit, because this stage feels pointless. You don't feel richer. You just feel slightly more restricted, and your brain starts whispering things like, is this even worth it? Nothing is really changing anyway. Maybe I should just enjoy my money instead. That's the trap. Because financial change is almost never immediate in a way you can emotionally feel day to day. It's cumulative. It builds quietly in the background while your day-to-day experience barely shifts at first. I remember this one moment in my own financial life where I was doing everything right. I was saving consistently, tracking things loosely, trying to be intentional. But if you had asked me at that time how my life felt different, I would have honestly said not much. And that's dangerous. Because when progress doesn't feel visible, your brain starts questioning whether it exists at all. But here's the funny part. If you zoom out just a little, like a few months or a year, the difference becomes obvious. You just never feel it in real time. It's like watching grass grow. You don't notice it happening until suddenly you realize the yard looks completely different than it did before. Why emotional spending becomes louder in the beginning of saving. There's another thing that happens during this middle phase that's really important. When you first start saving money, emotional spending actually becomes more noticeable, not because you're spending more, but because you're paying more attention, and your brain starts reacting like, oh wow, I really want that thing. I didn't realize how often I buy. Stuff like this. This urge feels stronger than I expected. And that can be unsettling, because it makes it feel like you've suddenly become worse with money, when in reality, you've just become more aware. It's like turning on a light in a room you used to walk through in the dark. Suddenly you notice everything, the clutter, the corners, the dust. But it was always there. That's what awareness does. It doesn't create problems. It reveals them. And in a strange way, that can make saving feel harder before it feels easier, because now you're not just dealing with spending habits. You're dealing with the emotional discomfort of seeing them clearly, but this is actually a good sin, because awareness is the first real step toward control. You can't change what you can't see. Asterisk. Saving money feels impossible at first, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're fighting against systems that were never designed to make it easy in the beginning. Your brain wants immediate reward. Your habits are shaped by environment. Your budgeting struggles against emotional reality. And your willpower, no matter how strong you think it is, has limits. So if you've ever felt like saving should be easier than it is, that frustration actually makes sense. But here's the encouraging part. None of this is fixed. Once you understand that saving isn't about discipline alone, but about psychology, structure, environment, it stops feeling like a personal flaw and starts feeling like a design problem. And design problems can be solved, not overnight, not perfectly, but gradually through small changes that build on each other. Maybe you automate one thing. Maybe you remove one friction point. Maybe you become slightly more aware of where your money is actually going. And over time, those small adjustments start to stack into something real. So if saving money has felt impossible lately, it doesn't mean you're stuck. It just means you're at the beginning stage where everything still feels heavier than it should. But that stage doesn't last forever. And once you move through it, something interesting happens. You stop thinking of saving as something you struggle to do, and start seeing it as just part of how your life runs in the background. Quiet, simple, consistent, and honestly, a lot more achievable than it looks from the outside.